Okay, it's 8:30. We ready? Ready as we're gonna be? All right. Oh, boy. I've some transcripts coming up and I'm reading myself speak. That's very strange. Oh. All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up at the Thursday or Wednesday. I don't even know what day it is. Maybe I shouldn't have started this, Pete. But welcome to the Read cohort for this is almost Thanksgiving, November 2023. We're going to talk about invasives. I'll let Pete talk about that more. I don't have a lot of announcements. I will say we are next month's cohort is pretty close to Christmas, but I'm still going to hold it. I've done that before. I had them right before Christmas. Just a little Christmas party. If we want to make it fun, or if we just want to make it just a support for each other. You had a good season, you had a bad season. We're all here to help each other on both sides and learn. So it's just going to be an open forum for any questions, any comments, anything you want to say. I know that it's been helpful for me to be on those late in the season and near the holidays, just to have everybody and the support everybody's given. So want to give that back as much as possible. If you're around, great to have you. If you can't come, no worries. Have a great holidays. Do want to announce that for people who don't know yet, that we've been working for years and years on getting stabilization and coordination and my words are failing me, but just getting the resource advisor positions as NWCG sanctioned positions. So they aren't agency dependent. They cross the boards with all the standards, and this training is standardized. And the NWCG resource advisor subcommittee got that pushed through and got the okay that they are in process of becoming what we call 310-1. They're going to be published in 310-1. The current schedule is January or the next time they publish a new 310-1. So we're hoping in January that we're going to talk about those positions. We've had some talks about them in the past. Hasn't been a lot of change to this, what we submitted when we talked about it last time, but we want to bring everybody up to speed on them as that gets implemented, moving into the next fire season. So January is just going to be talking about the positions and questions and comments, and we'll get some people on the subcommittee. And I used to be the chair of the committee, so I'll help with that discussion too. And then we'll move forward into 2024. I think that's all I got, Pete. Let you have it.
Thanks, Lynn. That's huge news. A lot of folks been doing some real heavy lifting behind the scenes for a long while. Collateral duty on that resource advisor subcommittee, to one of the standing committees of the NWCG, whose name I can never remember, incident planning or something. So that's awesome. Looking forward to getting that. Actually been fielding a few calls since there's fire activity on my old home unit about what makes a reef and what makes a read and who can do what. And hopefully when that is rolled out in 310-1, that'll help clarify some of that stuff that gets real fuzzy in agencies sometime. Hey, I'm coming to you from Southwest Virginia, and for those of you that haven't been following along, it's fire season for us. I know it's wound down in a lot of the country, but we're at preparedness level 3, which is, it's a normal time of year for fall fire season for us here in the Southeast, but we're having a pretty severe one. And at this point, as of this morning's SAC morning report, all 4 of our Well, there's 4 complex incident management teams assigned in the region, and we got almost 2,200 resources assigned, and a whole bunch of those are from all over the country, probably from where you are as well. So thanks for that. And I'm heading out in the morning to a wilderness fire about 50 miles north of where I'm sitting right now on the George Washington and Jefferson National Forests. Hey, that said, in the announcement for today's meeting, and something that I know Steve is going to discuss, is the sort of brand new NPS guide for invasives. And it was it's in the Resource Advisor Cohort Google Drive. It's a little bit clunky to get there. The address is also in the meeting announcement. I wasn't able to live link it, so you got to copy and paste it. But if you want to go to that, I'll drop it in the chat again. But it's a 7-page document, and I know Steve will talk some more about it. With that, I get the honor and privilege of introducing Steve Buckley, and we'll let him introduce the other panelists. And I'll start with a big thanks. Steve stepped in when we went from, oh yeah, we'll do invasives in November, being 6 or 8 months away, to, oh yeah, that's a few weeks away. Are our presenters still available? And our original presenters had conflicts. So Steve rounded up. He stepped in the breach and then rounded up a great gaggle of folks to join him. So today is about invasives for resource advisors. Hugely important and growing concern in many areas. So Steve is the ecologist and liaison for the NPS California invasive plant management team. And Steve, with my thanks, please take it away.
Thanks, Pete. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Steve Buckley. I'm the liaison for the California Invasive Plant Management Team. Everybody's probably has an IPMT nearby throughout the country. There's 17 of the IPMTs throughout the United States that are Park Service supported. 15 of them are supported by Washington, and then 2 of them are actually supported within park units. But we serve as kind of for the Park Service, we serve as kind of in a way, we serve as one part kind of community organizer, one part subject matter expert on invasive plants and sort of restoration work within the Park Service as a whole. And so it was very exciting to Martin Hutton had reached out to me when him and Jeremy were indisposed and had some other conflicts. So I'm happy to kind of step in and help do that. And I really appreciate Courtney Rowe being on vacation. I think Emma's on vacation too. So I appreciate both of them. As I realize, like, they're getting their out of office messages. I appreciate both of them very much. They're both with INYO. Courtney, you're with the INYO, and then you're with. I'll let Emma. I'll let Courtney.
INYO. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, and then Emma's with Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit. So yeah, with further ado, I'm actually on the West Coast, kind of jumping east to west here. I actually co-house at Redwood National Park. And so I dropped a link in the chat that's direct to the fire readiness guide that we're going to kind of just chat about briefly. I don't think any of us have presentations for today. We just kind of wanted to talk about our experience and give you all a chance to kind of ask questions, because we think a lot of times that's, for resource advisors, that has kind of the best, in a lot of ways, that's kind of where we're at this point. I think a lot of us are really familiar with invasive plants and sort of readiness. The Courtney thankfully dropped. There's a whole bunch of other California Invasive Plant Council years ago that were Park Service and Forest Service staff that really were deeply involved in developing a whole set of best management practices guides, which can be really valuable as well for the work that we're doing. And I'll give just kind of a brief introduction on where this guide came from. This guide couldn't have happened without fire and aviation management. Cedar, Drake was really heavily involved, Jen Gibson, Nelson Siefkin, Eamon Angber, who's our regional fire planner. I have a really good chance to share an office with Eamon, so I'm really kind of deeply embedded with fire here in California as kind of an obvious reality of invasive plants in California. And this guide itself came from right in the aftermath of the Dixie. I had been at Lassen Volcanic National Park during the Dixie, and I know Lynn was involved as kind of the lead read on the other branch of the fire. And we had thought at Lassen that we were pretty well prepared for an incident, but we absolutely weren't prepared for something on the scope and the scale of the Dixie fire, where we had incidents. There were pieces of hundreds of fire trucks moving at once during these surges when they were trying to catch some branches of the fire. So there was a lot of movement, and there was a lot of movement of incident command posts, and there was not a lot of weed washing that was going on. There were a lot of problems, and it sort of gave us kind of an insight into what did it mean to be prepared for wildland fires, and so we kind of stepped back from that. We started with this with Calypsy at the end of 21. I had enlisted Calypsy to just do a simple survey of the units that I work for. So that was kind of the transition point where I was working for Lassen, and then I moved over into the current position. and what we found was really kind of striking. There was a real variability in terms of how just even NPS units in California were prepared or not prepared in the case, as the case was. And so it was variable. Some had local unit resource guides, the LURGs, others didn't. Others had WFDS statements, others had absolutely no WFDS statements prepared. So it really kind of gave us kind of an opportunity to step back and kind of think through the process about, well, what does it mean to be prepared for invasives? And so what we did was we had 2 workshops. One of them was in January of last year, and then another one in March of last year that California Invasive Plant Council helped facilitate for us. And that was really where this guide kind of came out of. So we kind of discussed it with managers, like, well, what are you seeing? What are you needing? And it was really clear that there was not a lot of direction. There was a lot of understanding that, hey, these are things that we need to do, but there wasn't a lot of clear sort of like, hey, how do I do that? And so we tried to prepare this in a way that was sort of as sort of how, as kind of a how-to manual as we could. And that's why it reads in that sort of like stepwise way of, developing, some of the pieces that we really learned that were really essential in the process, are how advantageous WFDS can be and how important it is to make sure that you have really consistent language in your WFDS documents, and how advantageous that is from the very get-go of initial attack and extended attack into, as you get a type 1 or 2 teams are designated, or complex teams as they're now going to be. And it was really an opportunity. I think we saw that there was a kind of an opportunity here to help a lot of the units, the smaller units, that don't have necessarily the support that a lot of the bigger units get. For the Park Service, we have such a range of, the parks like Yosemite, which have a whole roster of resource advisors and staff who are already thinking about this kind of on a daily basis, to really small or moderate sized units. To Redwood, where we had an incident. We had the largest fire in the park's history this year, all 740 acres of it. But it was interesting because there really wasn't a culture of resource advising set up, and we'd had some of these conversations about preparedness in the months leading up to it. But it's kind of indicative of that. We have an opportunity as invasive plant managers. We really the preparation is really one of the biggest pieces. And as we know, those first few operational cycles, as kind of all of those first few operational cycles are really important. And being able to have as much of that information preloaded and front loaded so that it's available to the incident command team, it's available to them right up front. You have your areas, dip locations, where your aquatic invasives are, where some of these pieces are, where your priority weeds are that you want to avoid. Being able to have that kind of information available, we really discovered is like, it was very hit or miss in the Park Service. And so this was just an attempt to try and kind of rectify that. And also just kind of provide parks kind of universally with kind of an approach. We had a lot of parks nationwide. My IPMT counterparts have a variable a variable relationship, so we say, with fire. So in some instances, that's very obvious in the Intermountain region, for example. We have lots of fire, whereas there's a lot of other units where it's just not a real consistent thing. So not a lot of parks were really available, or are really kind of set up to be, to be ready to go. So that's kind of the background on the project, and sort of where it came from. Like I said, it couldn't have been done without Fire and Aviation Management. They were really deeply involved in terms of helping us kind of craft the language and be really concise. And we've been really pleased with the response that people have. So as you read through it, if there's pieces or if there's other information that you feel like, hey, this should be something they've included, please shoot me an email. I'll drop my email in the chat here as we go along. But we're certainly open to iterations. One thing I will say is that the accessibility is screwed up. So if you're using a screen reader, it's messed up. We're still trying to get that fixed. So hopefully that'll be replaced on the Calypsy. But that's going to be the Calypsy link that I dropped in the chat is going to be the main source of it going forward. But I think I'll leave it there. I'm going to pass it over to Courtney and let Courtney kind of give an intro, sort of have at it.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I am Courtney Rowe. I work on the Enyo National Forest on the on the Mono Lake and Mammoth Ranger districts. I used to work on the Tahoe and Lake Tahoe Basin management units as a botanist, and I'm one of the WFDS entry folks for the Enyo, and also I did my graduate research on post-fire recovery in cheatgrass dominated systems. So my specialty is really in dealing with invasive grasses, their prevention and recovery from them. And I'm glad to be here today, and I'll have Emma, and I think Jeremy was able to join us too. So I'll have Emma and Jeremy introduce themselves as well.
Hi, good morning. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Emma Williams. I'm the forest botanist on the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit with the Forest Service. I also work as their BEAR coordinator, or Burned Area Emergency Response Coordinator, and a lot of that work involves the suppression, repair, and post-fire invasive plant treatments. I also support the resource advisor group on the basin, and a kind of key element of our pre-fire planning is a resource guidelines document that we update every year, and I'm really looking forward to integrating a lot of the guidance from this new document that Steve's group put together into updating this winter for next season. I know there's a lot of things I hadn't thought about before in that document, so looking forward to that. Thanks.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning from Hawaii. So I'm Steve Buckley's counterpart out in the Pacific Islands. We do mostly invasive plant control work, prioritization, and a huge amount of biosecurity, meaning that prevention strategies, EDRR, early detection, rapid response, sanitation, and our prevention work goes from forest pathogens, fungus, all the way up through ferns, invasive ferns, and flowering plants. I recently got to serve with Courtney Rowe as a trainee lead resource advisor, and that was to overuse the term drinking from a fire hose. It's a great assignment. I learned a lot, and I've got a long ways. I feel like I have a long ways to go. But it was a good one. And it's been wonderful working with Steve since he came onto the IPMPTs a year or two ago. And yeah, I was supposed to be teaching a chainsaw course this week. I remembered what it was I was scheduled to do, and we ended up needing to cancel that 2.5 weeks ago, which is good. It would have been 2 weeks in a row of teaching. Yeah, pleasure, and thank you, folks, for taking up and taking on this the invasive cause.
I think one of the things Steve and I wanted to do was be able to answer questions for people. So folks want to start, if you have burning invasive questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. And maybe while that's coming in, us on the panel can give sort of maybe one of our top one or two invasive tips. You know, for me, I've been working on invasives now since 2000, when I actually started with the Park Service in Golden Gate. And over the years, some of the, on top of the things Steve said around WWFDIS and having a really good LERG or local area unit guide, one of the best things I saw was when I worked on the Tahoe, I got to work with our fire folks and our GIS folks on our initial attack maps. Wow, I don't know, show of hands, anyone's units have initial attack maps for their people? If you haven't seen them, there, I've got one hand raised. A lot of units actually maintain maps for their fire resources on their unit that show a lot of the relevant fire resources, you know, on the ground resources, not personnel, but things that firefighters are going to need to know, where there's gates, the operational level of all the roads, approved dip sites, approved drafting sites. Those are really important for aquatic invasive species. But we also found that we were able to work with them and not put every single invasive plant or rare plant or cultural resource on the map, but pick select ones that were our biggies, you know, the ones that we were like, wow, we really can't go here, and get those on our initial attack maps, which were quad base and a map package that was available in Avenza for all of our initial attack resources. And for me, that was like the first step prevention that I could do. So, you know, for us, that was not really for our terrestrial invasive plants, but for the movement of aquatic invasive species or the protection of critical habitat, where moving aquatic invasive species into, say, red-legged frog habitat was going to be a huge concern. That is now available to everybody who's a firefighter on my unit, which is just very widely available. So of course you have to figure out what information you want to share, because it is going to be available to all your firefighting resources. But for us, we felt that drafting sites and approved dip sites and then critical red-legged frog habitat were important things for our firefighters to know. So I don't know if Emma or Jeremy want to share one of their top tips.
Yeah, Courtney, those are really good points, and I agree. I think that element in the readiness guide and what you brought up just now about prioritizing, you know, the biggies, and what locations. I know a lot of times we get requested, like, give us your invasives layer, and it's pretty noisy, right? And a lot of our areas that are already disturbed, and end up having some, you know, cheatgrass or other invasives that are very common along roadsides. But perhaps those tend to be the places that we want to use for staging areas, again, because they are already disturbed, versus areas that we don't want anyone in, because there's a lot of high priority species that don't exist anywhere else on the forest, or in our case in the basin, and we want to prevent their spread as a #1 priority. So I think those are kind of challenging decisions, and you can only make them on your local unit basis. But working with your fire and aviation staff to determine, like, where are those sites you're going to need to stage or put camp, or where all the equipment's going to be moving through, and where are the places that we really need to avoid. For those sites that you know you're going to be reusing for camps and you know, equipment locations, like mobilization locations, those are great places to be working, like the readiness guide kind of points out, on mitigating for the next fire. A lot of them are already weedy, like we talked about, and so what species are you trying to manage there, and how to mitigate you know, future issues and spread from those source locations. A lot of times, what I've seen in the Forest Service is that our base camps are located off of forest, and so we've been successful in engaging in partnership agreements using the Wyden Authority to fund our counties to manage weeds on and off forest. So that can be a tool to use to help kind of proactively work more across the landscape in your area, to to mitigate those issues ahead of the fire. Because as you know, once the fire is in effect, you kind of have limited opportunities beyond avoidance and, you know, limiting introduction of new species through weed washes and things like that.
I think I could reiterate a lot of those points. The importance of pre-planning and prioritizing what the threats are. If a threat is widespread in an area or on a unit or on an incident, then possibly it's less of a priority than something that is incipient, meaning that it's not widespread, or it's in localized spots. And that pre-planning can contribute a lot to where staging areas go. If there is a localized threat, not stage in that location and maybe move it a few miles, few kilometers down the road or up the ridge to a place that's technically clean, and then setting up post-fire treatments afterwards, or actually more so monitoring, and then the possibility of treatments, and developing the partnerships with people who co-use a unit. They're units that have right-of-ways and facilities such as cell towers that are subject to greater levels of traffic and possible introductions, but developing those partnerships to have to identify the common ground with your adjacent landowners, whether it be large privately held ranches or leased ranches, establishing that common ground beforehand, so that you're not trying to develop a relationship in a crisis situation. In the Pacific Islands, honestly, I'm paid by the National Park Service, but for the first decade of my job, 90% of my field work, our largest field projects were not on federal land. They were on adjacent lands, in partnership with others. So having those pre-established relationships and agreeing on certain areas where you can work together, because we're not always in agreement on land management strategies or goals. And then I believe I already touched on prioritization, but what are the most significant threats? Which ones are annual weeds? For invasive plants, maybe it's an annual weed that's not a necessarily threat. It's just an irritant on a unit, and that's going to fade away post disturbance. So obviously that would get less priority or less attention during an emerging incident than something that is long-lived. On that recent assignment in Oregon, gorse. We're saying on incident the seeds can last decades. It's actually hundreds of years. So the scope and the severity of the potential problem that we're dealing with or potentially spreading is hundreds of years, at least 50 years out, where we're going to have to monitor a site for potential contamination. And any introduction into wild area could be thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, $1 million worth of work years down the road to control. And once it's established in a site, it's contaminated, and that contamination lasts as long as the seed bank lasts for invasive plants. And with that, I'm currently fresh out of ideas.
I see a hand up. JD, did you have a question? Oh, he's disappeared from his video.
I think while he's coming back, I think one thing I'll add to that. Oh, go ahead, JD.
Yes, can you hear me? Hello. Yes. No, I wanted to make a good point on that whole thing, and you mentioned. I just want to speak on Emma's point, and then most recently Jeremy's point. It's kind of more identifying the source of the pollutants or the contaminants or the invasive species where the seed stock is coming from, and so just my background is in wildland fire suppression, working with hand crews. I've recently moved over to heavy equipment, and I've noticed a big thing with heavy equipment, especially it's really hard to get them thoroughly clean. on a regular basis, whether no matter how routinely or how high pressure or whatever you use to clean the equipment. And throughout my numerous experiences going in and out of the park on fires, there are weed wash stations set up, and I would look into. I would like to see literature, if whatever's available on weed wash standards, and as far as scale of cleaning of contaminants, and also just what type of equipment is necessary to meet the standard, in terms of that kind of thing. And then I currently work for a local government agency, and looking at mobilizing of resources in the event of a wildland fire. If we could establish, I noticed something, especially you mentioned, Steve, the Dixie fire, and something I noticed when I started. I was assigned to that for 3 weeks as a hand crew member, and we were assigned to the Cal Fire side of the management side of things, and we kind of circled the north end of that fire. And at no point when we were moving from point to point, did we go through any type of a weed wash scenario. And that's something, because of the scale of the incident. If there were agency boundaries or different administrative requirements as we were going from one division to the next, and that would be something that it's kind of frowned upon, because it kind of gets in the way of the operation, and it's just a layer of something you have to deal with.
If you want
But yes, so that's
Tyson,
kind of what I
your
was
mic is on. If you can turn it off, Tyson.
But yeah, no, that's kind of what I was thinking in terms of that. As far as identifying, say, OES resources or Cal OES resources, or a particular kind of thing to meet certain standards when it comes to, like forest practice rules, for example, they require contractors from all over the state to implement these projects that they're working on, timber harvest plans and various types of projects. And if we could have those coastal standards, those southern standards, those mountain standards, whatever we could implement, and kind of create a layer of administrative controls on this stuff prior to mobilizing these resources and strike team configuration or whatever the needs are. And then we're talking about the best management practices once they're out there, going from point to point once they're assigned under some kind of a structure. And I'm showing up late to the meeting, and I've only been a read for a couple of years, but I'm happy to jump into this whole the new standard. The fact that it's going to be in the new 310, it's great. That PMS book, that's the standard that we use at local government, and also in CICCS standards. That's what we're going to. So any official task book, the one that I got approved was NWCG was a draft copy. So I'm happy to go into the legitimate form of it and have my agency adopt that as a policy too. So speaking on all things, I really appreciate you guys. So thanks a lot.
And JD, we appreciate your perspective coming in operationally. I think most of us as weed managers share the frustrations that you've shared, and that all of us have tried to address those things potentially on incidents. And there are layers of bureaucracy that arise. To answer your question, there actually are from the federal side Viper standards on what weed washes have to be, and there's type 1 and type 2. And there's a whole series of specs in Viper on what they have to carry. But also know, just like with any piece of equipment, there are the specs in Viper, and then there are those pieces of equipment showing up on incident and meeting the specs. So one of the things with weed washes we often encounter is that what is spec'd doesn't arrive, and we may have to send it back, or we may have to make do with it if it's going to meet the mission to the best of the ability, and we can't get another resource on site or piece of equipment relatively soon. So there is still a lot of variability in what weed washes look like, but there is typing, and there are specs available in Viper that folks can look at to decide what that looks like. In terms of moving from place to place on incident, I'm sure the other panelists can speak to that. I share that frustration. I have actually had, on our incident in Oregon with Jeremy recently, we actually had pieces of equipment washed before they moved places. But it depends on the scope of the scale of the people that you're trying to mobilize. If you are going to actually have to wash 600 pieces of equipment before they go out on the line today, operationally, that's just not something an incident management team is going to accept as a layer that they can, as a reasonable measure for the amount of work that's done during the day. That being said, one of the things that you can work on is putting your weed washes further out, quote unquote, further out from ICP, getting them closer to the line. If you can distribute your weed washes to getting them closer to the points you're really concerned about. For us, it was close to wilderness, the roads that access wilderness, and getting those weed washes staged away. Then that allows people to drive out of ICP, get further out to the incident, and then weed wash before they go into areas for us that are concerned. In places where there's gorse or Scotch broom, there's often, or even yellow star thistle, there's often a front. We talk about the yellow star thistle front on the western slope of the Sierra. So maybe looking at staging your weed washes where they're closer to that front instead of at ICP. You're not going to be in a favorable position with incident management if you have a 30-minute to an hour backup to get into the weed wash every day. Those are logistics you really have to work out with ground support to figure out before you establish a weed unit or a weed wash unit or weed wash scenario. Because once you've done that for 2 days, if you've blocked everybody up for a half an hour to an hour, the grumbling about weed washes is just really going to be extreme. I don't know, Emma, Steve, Jeremy, if you want to add anything to the points JD brought up.
I think the only thing that I would add is this, again, it goes back to preparation in a lot of ways too. One thing that we've kind of encouraged, that we've talked a lot about, is doing kind of a roads analysis around your unit. I think with the Dixie Fire, one of the things that taught us is that scale is kind of out the window. That you need to be thinking of the whole landscape now and how it connects to other units, and how, where are you going to put these things? In California, one of the conversations that I have with Cal IPSI is, well, why doesn't every Cal Fire station in the entire state have a weed wash station? Because they're everywhere, and it makes a lot of sense to harden that, because you have other issues that come with weed wash stations. It's not just where you site them. It's, well, is that near a wetland? Does it have proper appropriate drainage? Are there other issues that come with that weed wash station? There's a lot, and sometimes your IC is like super against weed wash stations. I mean, we've had this conversation because one of the FMOs for the Park Service is really not keen on weed wash stations, and so we've had to kind of really dig deep about trying to figure out, well, what is an appropriate weed wash station, and like what is okay for us to order. So I think there are other issues that can be resolved in some ways ahead of time, to where there isn't like a universal standard for what's effective. I think that was your original question, was sort of, is there literature on this? And I think that's a great research area that maybe, the Missoula Fire Science, Center should look into. Is it's a very simple technology. Use a lot of water, use a lot of air, blow off everything, the gunk and everything that's on these vehicles. So it's a simplistic in sort of, it's kind of like on the surface of it. And yet it's very complex, just like these machines are that we're trying to clean. How a dozer has how many crannies and nicks and crannies, and how many places where it's going to get it. So it's going to vary by incident, but the more that you can kind of be prepared for, okay, where are the bottlenecks? Where can we do these sort of things? Phytophthora is a huge issue out here in the West, sudden oak death. And that's a big issue where you need to be able to go through a wash station and be able to appropriately sanitize that. So there's a lot of, and I do know the effectiveness study somebody did, but it's of one very specific type of weed wash station. And it's not it's not a longitudinal study, which is really what we need, because we really need to look at sort of like, well, how effective are they in implementation, not in these sort of controlled environments. And that's kind of one of the challenges that we've found. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Lynn, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just coming in on it from the team's perspective, and my position on a team, and having to deal with weed washes and resource advisors really wanting, and lead reads really wanting a weed wash, and really great reasons for wanting one, but then a team, how that works in the dynamics of the team. And one, they're hard, sometimes they're very hard to get, they're hard to mobilize. And then oftentimes, if you get stuck in where they need to go, because of all those reasons that you just said, Steve, there's many reasons why weed wash should go one place. It may not work operationally, as Courtney said. So the biggest thing is if you need a weed wash to come on, or you have any exotic that needs to be dealt with, is to talk to the team and operations and potentially plans, ordering everybody, but trying to get everybody and go, this is the issue. How can we solve the issue? And all the brains of the team will come up with some amazing ideas of how to deal with that. Sometimes I've actually been yelled at by lead reads for not being able to get a weed wash when my team's there and not being able to put it in the right place. And it's because of all these different reasons. It wouldn't work operationally, and it wasn't that the team didn't want to protect the resource or stop the weed issue or the invasive issue. Is that it wouldn't work for that fire. So we came up with other ideas, and it's spinning it into other ideas that actually worked better than just ordering a weed wash. So I think as a resource manager, just to keep that idea of how to move through the system, of you have some great minds who know what all the other moving parts. And if you get that buy-in from the team and operations, they end up, and you get them to say that, hey, everybody on this fire, you are doing this, and they do that at briefing. You just have buy-in from the whole team, and then all the firefighters follow better than if a lead resource advisor says something on the stage, because it's more of an order. You must do this, and it worked within the system. So just some advice coming from a team perspective.
I'll
We were
just
lucky enough on our last. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Emma.
Oh, I just wanted to jump off with what Lynn said regarding the weed washes. I think and Courtney's point about there are Viper specs, and we order through Viper for the Forest Service managed incidents. But big fire years, sometimes there's no contractors available, right? And we came up to a situation on the Caldor fire where the weed wash didn't work because it got into October and it was freezing up in Tahoe, and their weed wash, they couldn't function. So one thing we were able to do on the Caldor fire was work with our counterparts who were starting to mobilize the suppression resources towards a hazard tree operation that you're seeing a lot on fires now. And those aren't the type of equipment that's, if it's mobilizing from another area in the fire, it had a lot of exposure potentially to existing infestations. And so when it's moving to a new area, there's no check-in sheet to go to a weed washer. They're not going to be driving all the way back to camp, an hour away. So you can kind of work with the team, like Lynn was saying, to use what you have on hand. And, in one case, we were able to establish kind of a field wash with water tenders and an engine, to help mitigate for resources that we're moving into this area for a new operation. And so sort of using what you have on hand for readiness as well. It can be really useful to work within your unit and try to identify funds to purchase a weed wash. It helps you with your veg projects, all your ongoing projects on your unit, but during an incident, it can help you get a weed wash on site sooner and help with the mobilizing to the field where you might not be able to get a contractor out to or something.
Yeah, and even having hotseas or pressure washers, or even going so far as to identify near your local unit where all of the local car washes are. You can even that even becomes a layer of value in terms of being able to communicate to the crews and everyone around you. Hey, there are other resources that you can actually run these through. Identify all the GSA car washes, because sometimes something is better than nothing in a lot of these instances, and being able to have that. So yeah, the hotseas and having the pressure washers. I think a weed wash, I think the one I saw, the Shasta T just bought one a couple years ago, and it was like $35,000 for a trailer version of it that's kind of completely self-contained. The other thing to keep in mind with a weed wash is the water. And so once you use the water, it's got to be treated because it's a pollutant. And so depending on your state's water laws, that can be another kind of factor in terms of playing that out. Courtney, were you going to add something to that?
Oh no, just on the cost and the storage of having one on your unit, it's very helpful, but it's also you have to manage it then at the same time, which is a good thing. But I also wanted to see, Todd, do you have another question? If not, I want to try to fit in one more question in our last 15 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to bring up that some people might be aware of it, but there's going to be new bear direction policy on invasives probably coming out this spring related to like pathogens spread by suppression repair and like Port Orford cedar, root disease, and sudden oak death, and both terrestrial and aquatic. And it's sort of in some of that's been approved this winter, and we'll probably come out with some direction before next fire season, next summer. So that'll be part of the continued integration of where there's been some suppression damage and suppression impacts that actually bear will take care of. So just to keep that on you guys' radar, that this is it's happened this year, and it'll probably start happening more. So just further integration between Reed Reefs and the bear program.
That's so exciting because it hadn't been the case for a while. So thank you, Todd, for working towards that.
Both aquatic and terrestrial. So
awesome. I just saw that
great.
happen up in Oregon, which is great.
Yes.
Other questions? We'd love to be able to take another question before we run out of time. We've got a hand raised. Can't see who it is.
Pete?
Hey, Courtney, Pete here. I know that Sarah was not able to join us today, and she has more of a aquatic focus. So I'm just wondering if we could just touch on aquatic invasives in addition to terrestrials for a minute.
Sure. I worked on the same aquatic. We're lucky in Tahoe. We deal with aquatic invasive species as I say we, even though I'm on the ENYO now. I worked in the Tahoe for a number of years. We work on in the Tahoe interagency on aquatic invasive species. That's the first thing. Is just like on the terrestrial side, if you have a weed management area group, a WMA group, having an aquatic invasive group goes a long way to having those partnerships in place beforehand to figure out where your critical sites are. And one of the things I would think about with the spread of invasives is aquatic invasives is where are you trying not to get them? So what are your critical values at risk? To me, that is the first thing that you really need to look at when you're looking at aquatic invasives, is not just where we don't want to, not just, hey, overall prevention, because when you're dealing with water movement is harder to control than the propagules of terrestrial species. But what really matters to you? Are there particular lakes, particular habitat that you're trying not to get aquatic invasives into? And the other thing I'll point out is that in the chat, I posted the NWCG Aquatic Invasive Prevention Guide, and there is actual direction in the Red Book now on preventing aquatic invasive species. So that's stuff that most fire resources should be familiar with. If not, you can at least turn to them and say, hey, this is actually in the Red Book. You should read the general guidelines on preventing aquatic invasives. But a lot of it, just like with the spread of other pathogens, is using water where you draft it from, using it as close to the source as possible, not moving between sources without cleaning equipment. And then really one of the best things units can do is pre-identify and go out and survey your approved dip sites, because there's a lot of operational constraints on where you can dip in terms of how equipment can get into it, the prevailing wind. So working with your local FMO to figure out where are we actually likely to dip here, and then figuring out if you have aquatic invasive species and going through a process together of identifying where you're going to actually approve dip sites. Anyone else from the panel want to add anything?
I think the other thing, the PMS 444, the document that Courtney referred to is actually is worth looking at, you know, especially because I think we oftentimes, you know, we always think of invasives and we immediately go, well, plants or, you know, star thistle or cheatgrass. I mean, it's what we know. We're not exactly aquatic born organisms. So I think that, you know, the key thing too is remembering that other things can be transported in water too. You know, you oftentimes think about, when we think about AIS, it could be chytrid, you know, it could be different types of fungus, things that are really invisible. So it's really being careful about just being very conscious of how things are being done. You know, yeah, you have those screens, you may have those screens, but are those screens really ancient, or where have they been used last? Have they been decontaminated? You know, really simple kind of very subtle things that we can do that can really prevent, you know, very difficult and challenging downstream concerns. So I think those are kind of really key pieces with AIS. And yeah, what Courtney says about pre-identifying those things, it goes to a lot of the things that we've talked about pre-identifying. You know, you don't want to get into a situation where you're identifying. You want to try and get out as much as you can and identify everything that you can on your local unit, right? But we all know that that's kind of it's not going to be realistic in every case. But the more that we can mitigate that, the more that we can create this sort of stoplight system where, hey, this is a no-go. This is, yeah, let's talk to a reader. This is totally okay. This is an area that we know of. Those are really good strategies, you know, whether it's AIS or whether it's the actual invasives. You know, incident commanders don't need to know every single species or every single species or where every single species of invasive plant is in your unit. They need to know what the priorities are. What are your priorities? Because oftentimes you're going to have 5 minutes and you're going to only get like 3 or 4 things. You're not going to get your whole laundry list of things that you really want to deal with. And a lot of our units are horribly invaded. That's just the reality of, you know, 400 years of Euro-American expansion. I mean, we're bringing everything with us. So the reality of that is try and pick and be really careful with what you're looking for and what you're really kind of after. And then prioritizing that so that you can make sure that those things that are the highest priority. That's kind of where I would leave that. Jeremy or Emma, do you got to add to that?
Pardon me, I'm typing in the chat right now.
Well, Jeremy's doing that. Yeah, I can share our resource guidelines for the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit. Sarah Muskoff contributed to that. She's our aquatic biologist who manages that aquatic invasive species and works within that collaborative working group that Courtney was speaking to. And so a lot of that document has those guidelines on decontamination to stop the spread of chytrid, to, you know, which are the no dip lakes due to aquatic invasives or due to our threatened and endangered species. And the difference between those. But I think a big part of it's like really need to have a good plan, but then kind of what Lynn was speaking to earlier is how to put that plan into action once you get in the fire. So what I find is that trying to work this in at the very beginning with the initial attack team that comes on and build it into the incident kind of operations at the get-go, and then it's working its way through all of the transition plans as you're getting new teams on, and you're not trying to brief every team on these, you know, what decisions were made by another team, you know, a month ago and all of that. So that can be really challenging. And I think the more you have your spatial data together, like Courtney was saying before, and your fire and aviation staff from the local unit on board and really knowledgeable about those guidelines, the more they can help communicate to the incoming team about, you know, what the protocols are for the fire.
I think the other thing you need to add is that you really need to start with why. And we talk about this when we teach resource advisors, is that it can go a long way if you have a short 1-page, half paragraph, this is why this is important, that can move through that transition with people. So, you know, we say things like chytrid, or we say things like aquatic invasive species, and a lot of our fire folks just don't know why that matters. When you start to have pictures of the entire delta choked full of invasive plants, or the fact that this is one of the largest biodiversity threats that's out there other than habitat fragmentation, finding your elevator pitch for why this matters with the team is really important. Just as important, I would say, as having all of those other ducks in a row is being able to articulate really why this matters. Because a lot of people, when you say invasives, are simply going to roll their eyes. But when you start to say, this is a threat to the trout streams that you love to fish in. This is a threat to these really important species for us, and here's why that species is important. That's stuff people can get behind and really become allies about.
Yeah, as much as that, another thing that's starting to emerge is the potential operational delineations. Lynn talked, or Courtney talked about the initial attack maps. And, this is another thing to think about too, is as this emerges with potential operational delineations, it's another angle for us to really kind of explore as invasive plant managers for being able to do a lot of the pre-work. It's like the ICPs, it's like, if you know where the ICPs are going to go, there's only so many places an ICP is going to go. And so being able to survey those, being able to have those, I think Emma made a great point about getting that in the contracting language, get that in your cooperative agreements with those land management agencies so that they have to deal with those issues. We've had that issue at Yosemite repeatedly that we've had to deal with. And so it's a really key piece, the more we understand like what's going to happen, and we all know this now, these are generally going to happen. California, if it's any kind of indicator, this going to be repeated. And we're, it's, ad nauseum, I'm afraid. So, getting ahead of that curve, making sure that you're just kind of in that space of pre-thinking a lot of that kind of stuff, it can really, really, really benefit you. Lynn?
Yeah, I just want to point out too, something to ruminate on and have an answer for is if the incident is really driving on like Forest Service roads that are open to the public, and there's not a lot of dozer lines or anything else going off of that, and they're just driving on like roads that are open to the public, even if they're dirt roads, and you ask for a weed wash or for something, have the why, really have the why, because they're going to look at you and go, well, why are you picking on us when the public comes out here and they're driving this more than we are? But that's also really like, what is the threat? Is the threat coming from somewhere else, or is the threat there and them spreading it? And being able to explain that, like, what is the threat? Where's moving? Are you moving things out? Are you moving things in? Or you have a spot location that you want to protect versus everything, and have that answer if you're going to push that issue of putting weed washes in.
Pete, looks like you got your hand up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm the timekeeper today, and looking at the hands on the wall, we're coming up hard on the end of our hour. Presenters, if you're able to hang on for a few minutes, and I know that's not possible for folks that are on vacation, on much deserved leave. So just a couple quick things to honor folks that have other commitments. Number one, thank you so much, Courtney, Emma, Jeremy, and Steve. Also, thanks to Lynn for posting a bunch of our older sessions. They were sort of in the limbo in the editing room for a bit, and they're now up on the Read Cohort YouTube channel. So some great resources there. Also, some great info, I think, since I wrote it or edited it in the MailChimp meeting announcement. Some links to some other very valuable resources. We are having our next session on December 20th. If you've got that on your calendar, if you can't make it live, it will also be posted. Again, thanks to everybody, and folks, kind of maybe just 30-second closing comments from each of the presenters, maybe starting with you, Steve.
Yeah, I think the only thing for me is, you know, no matter how prepared you think you are, you're not. And I think that's kind of, it's kind of a crappy position for all of us to be in, but we got to remember that we're into this phase, this new phase, is this new world that we're entering, you know, where we're going to have compounding disasters. You're going to have challenges getting what you need. So always, you know, the more we can do ahead of time, the more we can understand, the more you can build those relationships with your fire staff and have them understand the reasons and the motivations. It's gonna serve you in the long run. And I think that that's kind of one of the key things that I want to impress on everybody is do the pre-work, get it done, but make friends, you know, along the way, you know, spread the resource advisor gospel, I suppose. But thanks everybody. Courtney?
Really put some hard thought into what are you going to what's going to break your heart if it happens. You know, like we all want to prevent the spread of weeds, we all want to work hard on that, but what you're in an emergency situation, start to think and do the pre-planning, but really be conscious of the things that you're asking operationally of the team, and think about, you know, what's going to break your heart, and then work with the team to explain why these things matter, and know that they're gonna be on your side if you make a good case, and rely on them to come up with solutions. You provide the expertise, they actually execute the plan. And I just had amazingly great experiences with team when I can articulate the why, and when I only focus on, you know, one or two resource issues at a time with them, instead of preventing the spread of cheatgrass in the Great Basin, for example. So really be thoughtful about what you're deciding to ask when we're mobilizing resources.
Emma, how about you?
Yeah, just real quick, these plans are very important. They're not like a one and done. Keep doing your EDRR, do your surveys, do your mitigations, and once you test them during a fire, update them based on what was working, what wasn't working.
Awesome. Jeremy?
Pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you guys. Yeah, reiterate pre-planning, run scenarios from a local perspective, helping your units and adjacent landowners pre-plan. Some areas, and I can speak to this directly, are very reluctant to start that pre-planning for prevention spread of invasives. Help them along. State the case clearly, concisely, in a manner that relates to them locally, so that they can develop buy-in, and you can reach some kind of consensus, and then really get into the pre-planning, and like Emma said, adapt your plans based on what works well, what doesn't, and then things that you can build on in the future. And yeah, we're seeing unprecedented. I actually am tired of using the word unprecedented. We're just seeing different things now. Just a month ago or a few weeks ago, we had a fire in rainforest in Hawaii, which doesn't happen very often. And yeah, so just be ready for it. And that's why I say run scenarios in your heads for local units and local areas. Think of the things that are unthinkable that you haven't considered in the past.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm reading your good comment, your latest good comment in the chat as you were speaking, and you know, that's good stuff there, brother. Thank you. Back to what Steve said, the pre-planning, you know, when the fire starts and the team's rolling in, you're way behind the 8 ball. And here we are in mid-November, man, it's planning time, right? It's planning time for next season. If your unit doesn't have any kind of an initial attack plan, preparedness plan, if they don't have any kind of a resource advisor guide, if you don't have a readily available list of your dirty dozen or your top 10 or your top 3, a first step is just having that, right? And able to share it. So baby steps and simple things get us started. folks, as folks drop off, appreciate everybody. If you've got a question, might be easier to go ahead and raise your hand rather than try to type it in the chat as we wind down here. We'll keep things open for a couple more minutes.
JD, do you have another question?
No, I just comment. I wanted to say thank you to you guys, and the chat wasn't working for me, so unfortunately, I wasn't able to see a lot of the postings. But I really appreciate you guys' inputs, and I know that I was going to get a 1-2 punch from Jeremy once I got another explanation from on top of everybody else. But I really appreciate it all. Thanks a lot, guys. I look forward to being to more of these meetings in the future.
Good deal. Thank you.
JD.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
I'll also be putting those, at least the PDFs on the Read Google Drive.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
You know, it's interesting that the weed wash station was ironically how the readiness guide started. Like because we, you know, I had this conversation with Jen Gibson, and it was like we couldn't figure out where to put it with the, you know, and the ones they had at the Dixie were just a nightmare. They weren't working. And so we had originally started that conversation at that, and then it sort of morphed into this, well, wait a minute, we're not ready for any of this, like any of these other pieces. So it was really fascinating as it kind of morphed. The guide originally was